Welcome to the Mustard Seed Media video podcast. My name is Bob, and this is the podcast for Drupal web designers. It's been a long time, but it is summer here in Michigan, and I like to go outside instead of play with Drupal. So, sorry there haven't been many screencasts. One of the requests that we've gotten recently, and I've seen from a lot of clients, is people want to know about workflow. They want to know how to control when some users post something and then we have administrator type users and we want to pass that post sort of through some approval processes and things like that. How do we set that up? How do we do that? Today we're going to look at workflow module and rules module to get that done. It's going to be a very simple setup. You can expand this to craziness if you want to, but I'm going to keep it very simple. This is a very simple moderation setup that I use on a lot of sites that I build, and hopefully it'll give you an idea of how to set it up and let you see some of the options that are available. So let's not waste any time and jump right into workflow. So workflow module, drupal.org/project/workflow. And this basically has all the tools you need. You could just download this, but and it works with the triggers and actions module to be able to do things. And the reason for the triggers and actions modules are when a workflow state changes. So a workflow state is something like we create a piece of content and it goes into a review state. It's not published yet. We need people to review it, or maybe it goes into a spell check state, or it goes into a content check state, or magazines are big on all this. So the triggers and action stuff. The trigger in Drupal makes it so when something happens, when some action happens, when someone creates a new piece of content, we want an action to happen. We want something to happen. Maybe we want an email to be sent to an administrator saying, hey, there's some post that you have to approve, or maybe we want the post to publish when something happens. So that's all the triggers and action stuff. So Drupal, you could use actions module and trigger module in Drupal. But rules module is much more slick. So I'm going to recommend that you set up rules module. So there's workflow, which does the actual transition states and does a lot of the setup for that. But then there's rules module, which is basically a drop-in replacement for triggers and actions, or at least actions. And so we're going to set up some rules to do some things when our workflow state changes. So workflow and rules are what we're going to be working with today. And so if we look at our modules, we just have rules and rules UI. It's nice they split out the UI. We're not going to use any of the other stuff. And then we just have core workflow module. So once those are set up, we can go to site building workflow. And you can see right now we have no workflow. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a very simple workflow to work across multiple content types that basically says you have to have something reviewed before it can be published. So I'm going to add a new workflow, and I'm just going to call it general content workflow, and I'm going to add it. So when I do this, now the first thing it's going to ask me for is what's the name of the first state, the first workflow state. So usually you have your published state, or I'm sorry, your creation. You don't count creation. This state is the first thing that it goes into after creation, and I'm going to call it review. Now, this is where the first time I used workflow, I got confused. I went, okay, I created one workflow state. Now what do I do? I don't understand how to do this. So the first thing you want to do is actually go back in and add another state. Because right now, the piece of content would go into review, but then nothing, right? It has to go into publish. So let's add another state, and we're going to call this one publish. Now, mine, it generally sets the weight based on the order that you created in, I think, but you can set a weight so you determine what order these things happen in, because then you can do things like go to next review state or to next state automatically. So now that we've set this up, I'm going to leave it very simple. Review, publish. You see that creation is a thing that's just core. It just happens by itself. Ignore this stuff at the bottom right here, right now. And so we have review and we have publish. This UI can be a little better because once you add a second workflow, then you have this same looking thing again down below. So just try and concentrate on like, here's the header, here's my states. So I could edit these states, but all they are is just the name and the weight, as you saw before. So now what I want to do is I want to actually edit the workflow. So this is the part that was sort of confusing before, because that screen's a little bit hard to find. So you go next to the name and you click edit. Now what we're doing here is we're now basically setting permissions on who can manipulate this workflow. So we don't want anyone to be able to send it from creation right to publish. We want to force certain roles into review. So let's say that we're going to allow anonymous users to create content, but it can only get to the review state. They can't send it to the published state. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say who can send it from creation to review. The author of the post. Notice this isn't actually a role that's created on my site. This is just whoever creates it. So the author can send it from creation to review. This is another screen that took me a while to wrap my brain around. I couldn't quite understand what was happening. And you can read some of this here, but it didn't really help me all that much, to be honest. So who can send it from creation to review? An author can. Who can send it from creation to review? An anonymous user can, because that's what we're going to do. So an anonymous user can send it from creation to review, but they cannot send it to publish. Who can send it directly from creation to publish? We're going to say an authenticated user can. And so then we can also make it go, skip this state, and we can go right from review to publish. An authenticated user can. So that means that once we've created something and it's sitting in the review state, who's allowed to send it to publish from the review state? The authenticated user can. Normally this might be a role called content administrator or workflow guru or whatever you want to call it. So we can go right from review to authenticated user, or the authenticated user can go to publish. That's basically who can approve the post and send it to publish. Now we can also send it back. We can say, okay, something's published, something's wrong. We want to send it back to review. Who can do that? Usually the same person that can send it to publish, but that's up to you. So here we can rename the workflow. So by the way, this whole thing is the most complicated part of workflow. If you can understand what this is doing, then you get it. We can rename the workflow again. Here's some other options. Show a comment field so we can comment on why we're moving it back and forth. So we can sort of have logs. Then we have something called a workflow tab permissions. And that's what this is, and that's what this comment field has to do with as well. But the tab permissions are basically, it'll add a secondary task, a tab on that node that says workflow and allows you to look at the node and click the workflow tab. Who can see that tab? We're going to say the authenticated user can, because it makes sense. They're the one administrating this content. So when we're all done, we're going to hit save. And we have just set up our workflow. So now all we need to do is assign this to certain types of content. Sometimes you're going to have one workflow for all content, in which case we would just say all of our content can use that workflow. You can, by the way, also put comments in it. So we're deciding whether it's posts or comments. And sometimes you'll have different workflows for different types of content. So I might create a second workflow that is just a story workflow. Oops, I went too quick. Let's see. Let me get back. And so, by the way, you're going to see, this is where it gets a little confusing here. But I'm going to add the same state names, review and publish. And just so you can see that we have two workflows now, a general workflow and a story workflow. So I would normally want to edit this and, do the same kind of stuff I just did. This is also something you'll notice you get sometimes. Author must have permission to go to at least one state. That's that creator of the content. I didn't have that checked. So now I have two workflow states. I have a story and I have a general one. So you could do things like, okay, assign the story one to this. And they might be different. I made them the same here, but you might have different phases. And so once all this is done, technically, we have a workflow set up. Right? Technically, we have two workflows set up. So now if we go to create a piece of content, if I create a story, you're going to see, I have a story workflow tab. And so I can change it to publish. Now, note that this is because I'm a site administrator and I'm an authenticated user, so I can send it to publish. If I was just an anonymous user, I wouldn't see this at all. This workflow stuff wouldn't even show up because I can only send it to one state. But I can send it to publish, I can do a comment, I can send it back to review. Right now though, by sending it to publish, it doesn't actually publish the content. So normally what you're going to want to do in this setup is you're going to want whoever can send it to review isn't allowed to actually publish the content. Now right now, publish is checked by default. And we would normally want to uncheck this, so we would go to content types. And by default, I would make it unpublished. So if I'm an anonymous user and I go to create a piece of content and I'm allowed to, it's not going to publish by default. So we have to set up a rule to publish it. This is getting a little convoluted. Hopefully you guys are following. They are allowed to only send it to review. And when they do that, they're not going to be able to check published because they're not going to have these options either because they shouldn't have the administer nodes permission, which gives you all of this stuff. So they're just going to create it. It's going to just go in the review state and there's nothing they can do about it. So now what we want is we don't want a person approving this content to also have to check published. So we're going to set up a rule that says whenever it goes into publish, the workflow is set as published and it's saved, it's going to automatically publish this piece of content. So that's where we're going to use rules. So we're going to go into rules, and rules is a big thing. I'm just going to show you a small piece of it. And we're going to add a new rule. And here's an example rule that might publish it. So I'm going to say workflow publish. So when a workflow state has changed, this is going to be my initial trigger that's going to make this stuff happen. So when a workflow state has changed, and I also want to add another condition, and the workflow state, content has workflow state of publish, and I'm going to set it for both of these. I'm going to save this rule and check both of these. So if the workflow state is published on either one of these, then I want the action to be to publish the content. And then I'm going to save that. So now I have just created a rule, which you'll see now in my rule settings, that says when the content changes into the publish workflow state, then publish the content. So let me show you an example here. Hopefully this will work. I didn't actually test this. So I'm going to say test content. Oops, actually let me make it a story. And let's pretend that I couldn't see any of this stuff. So it's going to go into review. It's not published. I'm going to save it. So now, as an authenticated user, I can see, oh, this needs to be, workflow provides views, by the way. If you look at the views, it'll show you some default views. So I could go into like workflow pending to manage my workflow. And this will show me all the stuff in the workflow currently. Oh, for some reason that's not working, but whatever. The summary, there I am. Oh, pending is when you schedule stuff. I'm sorry. You can use scheduling to schedule your workflow changes as well instead of using scheduler module, which is nice. So I'm going to go into this content. I'm going to click the workflow tab, and I'm going to publish it. You can see here's the scheduling stuff. I can schedule it for a change to publish on a certain date, but I'm going to do it right away. And now when I hit submit, what we're going to notice about this content is all I did was change the workflow state, but my rule also published it. So you can make rules to promote things if they have certain characteristics or things like that. So you're always going to want to set a rule that does this. Now, if you go into, don't do this. If you go in and you set, oh, I'm sorry, I don't even have actions installed. If you have actions module will say add action right here. And it's the worst UI in the world, which is why I don't use actions for this. Use rules. It's a lot cleaner. So we might want to make one more rule that says, hey, send an email to somebody when something needs moderation. This is another big request. So I'm going to add another rule. We'll say general workflow notifications. So workflow state has changed. And now this condition is actually going to be when the workflow state is made into, review. We want to notify someone, hey, there's something to review. So I'm going to set these both as review and change. And now my action is going to be, I have to find this, I think it's under system, send mail to maybe a user, arbitrary mail address, users of a role. we'll just say send it to all authenticated users, and we'll annoy everybody. Oops, sorry, that's this. Blah, blah, blah. This is the email that's going to get sent saying, hey, there's stuff to moderate. Save. So now we would actually get an email when somebody put something into review and it needed to be moderated. Whew! Hope that makes sense somewhat. There's a lot of little pieces to this, as you see. And hopefully you can now go in and create a workflow and set it, review, publish. Some of the things I like to do also are if you want to be able to separate, maybe a user has the administer nodes permission, but you don't actually want them to be able to publish stuff automatically. You want to be able to use the workflow stuff to publish it, maybe just to simplify your UI and to not confuse people with the publishing options. You could do a hook form alter and just hide your publishing stuff. Your authoring information, or your publishing options, I think it's called, and that way just use review and publish states to go ahead and toggle published or unpublished, things like that. So hopefully this helps. If it's confusing, just, I don't know, ask somebody else. I don't know. Hopefully it was helpful. We'll see you next time on the Mustard Seed Media Podcast. If you appreciate the podcast, feel free to chip in. We always appreciate that. There's a little chip in link. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. Have a wonderful summer. As I'm trying to do, I'm going to go outside now. Bye-bye.